Hello, 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 and welcome back, everybody, for to all my Be Health Empowered family for Excuse Me Doctor. On today, this wonderful day, our first broadcast post daylight savings time. It got so dark quickly today. I'm still just trying to catch up. Um, and welcome to all the newbies who are joining us for the first time on Excuse Me Doctor. You know, we are here every Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We're on YouTube, we're on Facebook. And wherever you're joining us, if you're joining us on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. I really appreciate you for it. And of course, if you're on Facebook, please hit that like button. We are here for you specifically to bring you health topics every week that affect your life. But we bring it to you through the lens of science, not through speculation. We clear up misinformation, not through the lens of disinformation, because we debunk that. And then we also let you know as things are changing and evolving, because it's a fast moving world and we got to keep up. And we just want to bring you the most up to date information so you have it, so you can make informed decisions for yourself, your family, and your community. We have a lot to cover tonight. And ultimately, we are going to be talking about one of the biggest announcements of last week, which is that the COVID-19 vaccines, specifically the Pfizer vaccine, is now available for children age 5 to 11. And this is huge for families as we're in the midst of the pandemic. But you know, it raises a lot of questions. Are the benefits of vaccination outweighed by the potential risk to our most vulnerable citizens, our children? And so parents have some decisions to make, all while dealing in this atmosphere of misinformation and half truths. So we're going to go there tonight. We're going to break it down for you. I have a child health expert, pediatrician extraordinaire, Dr. Yolandra Hancock. She and I are going to be taking your questions. We're going to have a discussion, and we really would love you to join in and be a part of it. So share this episode, start sharing it right now. Share it with all your family, your coworkers, your neighbors, anybody you know who has kids, who's going to be making this decision. Share it with people who are around kids and who are going to be getting these questions. So the guidance counselors, the teachers, the social workers, everybody, go ahead and share it, because we want people to be engaged. We want people to put their questions and their comments and concerns in the chat. And, you know, it's first come, first serve basis. So, you know, we're going to be getting to them in the order that you put them in. So get everybody on board and start, you know, loading those questions in. And, you know, I can't do this every week unless I have my trusty co-producers with me. So come on in, y'all. Miss Lila Mays and Mr. Wayne Bruce.
Howdy, howdy.
Hello, hello. I'm sorry, my headphones just did another wonky thing again.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, we can hear you and we can see you.
Uh-oh, we could.
Well,
What's going on?
I don't know.
Uh-oh. Now but the
see, her
smile is still
beautiful fur bit is giving her magical powers. She can disappear and reappear at will.
really, really. Howdy, 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 all. How's everybody doing?
Hello.
Yep.
Somebody,
So
Dr. Mill, somebody asked me why do I look around a lot. They notice that I'm like looking all around because
you got
I'm
to
running
explain to them
about
what you
5 screens. It's what I
do. Right.
do to make this beautiful show work for Dr.
Yes.
Mel.
And we appreciate you for it.
I'm
So
just looking
even though
around.
he might look a little distracted, he is right here with us.
Right.
Um, but yeah, let's jump into the numbers, because there's just been so much going on we have to talk about. Um, well, you know, we always start off with the number of COVID cases. So we are now at 46.3 million cases of COVID. We, as I mentioned before, we peaked at about 190,000 back in September, and we've been going down ever since to about 73,000 new cases a day. But now, just in the past week, it's starting to trend back up again, y'all. We're back up at 73,000 new cases a day. I mean, that's just kind of hard to fathom, but
That is.
and yeah. And it's because, probably we're going to winter in a lot of places, cold weather, people going in and being around folks not being socially distanced because they don't have the option as much to eat outside or be outside as much.
Right.
So I'm guessing that's why it is.
Okay.
And
So
then, uh-huh.
go ahead, Dr. Mel.
Well, no, I was just going to say, the good thing though is that um, the number of deaths from COVID are continuing to fall. So daily deaths from COVID are continuing to fall. Overall, we're at 751,000 deaths from COVID. But still over 1,000 people a day are dying. So 8,000
Wow.
more people have died from COVID since we were last together last week.
Dang.
Again, mind blowing.
It really is mind blowing. I want to just jump in. I feel like this might be the best place for us to sort of address this awful, awful tragedy that happened um, in Texas over the weekend. And I have
Yeah.
to say, the one of the first, and I'm talking about Astroworld. Our condolences to
All the families.
To
family
all the
members,
family,
friends.
friends,
Yeah,
yes.
it is just so tragic. But one of my first thoughts was, is COVID over? Because
Right.
gathering in these places like that packed in, and
Hmm.
somebody was like, Lila was Texas. I'm like, I got it, but still,
What
there's still
was
a
it, like
pandemic.
50,000 people?
It
Yeah.
wasn't that many. I
It was
never heard the
50,
Yeah, no,
number.
it was 50,000
50,000.
people and it was outdoors, but does outdoors
But
really matter
still,
when you're pushed in there together like sardines, which is what led to people dying, and the way that the place was organized in terms of
right,
them essentially being fenced in, 50,000 people fenced in
Wow.
and pushed up against the stage, which is
Wow.
what led to people getting trampled. But even if they had not foreseen that
Hmm.
hmm
part, which was
hmm
terrible, but should have
right,
been foreseen,
Hmm.
what about, like you said, just the COVID social distancing protocols that allow the ability to allow the crowd to spread out and not be
right,
hemmed in by those fences? Yeah.
Yeah.
right. So tragic. Again,
Yes.
our thoughts and prayers to the families. Um, we have to think for ourselves, people. Like, I want to have a good time too. The producers want to have a good time. Dr. Mel wants to
Yeah.
have a good time. But we all are responsible for our safety and the safety of others. Like, this
Mhm.
Right.
responsibility extends to the community. Um,
Yes.
Right.
so
I think
I just
that's where
wanted to
we're
say,
losing. I think that's where we're not getting it. You know,
mm, mm-hmm,
that's we talk about community in the United
mm-hmm,
States, but do we really live it? Have we really lived
right.
it for the past
Right.
5 or 6 years
Yeah, good point.
Or
Good
longer.
or
point.
longer?
Right, or longer.
Or
Yeah.
longer.
Um,
Yeah. And that's, when we talk about vaccinations, which, we talk
yeah.
about how the vax facts every week,
Hmm.
that's really the whole idea behind vaccination. It's not just looking out for yourself, it's also looking out for your family and your community, the people that you're around. So even if you think you'd survive COVID, the issue is that if you get it, you're going to be just yet another vector. You're going to be
Hmm.
another
Yep.
source of spread to
Hmm.
other people. And so, we're at about 68.3% of the eligible people over 12, which has now changed.
Right.
We're now eligible over 5, but about 68.3% of people over 12 have now been vaccinated. And about 24 million people have gotten their boosters. And I and Wayne Bruce are 2 of those 24 million, right?
All
Right,
right.
Wayne?
All right.
We're
Okay.
boosted. We're boosted.
You're
Yeah.
boosted.
Hmm.
We had vastly different experiences though. I was down for about 24 hours after my booster. I did have the fevers and the chills, but I
Wow.
wasn't I wasn't concerned. I wasn't stressed. Like I knew, because that same thing had happened to me before with my second shot. I knew if I took my Tylenol and drank my water and just, rested, that in 24 hours it would go away. And, it did. And I remember thinking to myself, gosh, what if I wasn't vaccinated and I had these same symptoms and it turned out to
Oof,
be COVID?
Wow.
I would be
right,
terrified,
right.
See,
honestly. But I wasn't
Yeah,
scared because I knew that it meant that my body was revving up and that my immune system was getting reawakened so
yeah.
that
hmm
if I eventually encountered COVID, I'd be
hmm
ready to fight it.
right.
Meanwhile, Wayne just
Meanwhile, back at the ranch, actually, I had a video shoot that day, and we it it I it felt a little weird. I'm not gonna lie, it felt a little weird, but I
Mhm.
think it was just the nervousness that I had. And once I got into the video shoot, all that went away, and I came home with a sore arm, and
And
Okay.
that
that's
was it.
gone. It's gone. It's gone.
Isn't that the
Meanwhile,
case though?
diametrically
Like when
opposed change
that's the
differences.
case when a man and woman team up, and you say, for example, it's a diet challenge, and the woman is working super
Right,
duper hard, right?
right,
Working super hard for 3 weeks and only lose 5 pounds. Man ain't doing nothing.
mhm,
He loses
right, and
13.
he loses 20. Right,
Well,
it's the
Right.
same
we
thing,
actually
right.
do stuff. You guys don't see it. We do stuff. I can't tell you what we
Anyway.
do, but it's
You
under
Oh,
the
okay.
definition of stuff.
you hit the nail
Okay.
on the head, Lila. Yeah, exactly.
All
Let's
right. Well, let's move on to these because this is super interesting to me. These COVID and I mean Pfizer and Merck COVID pills.
Yeah, people are saying this might be a game changer. So, Pfizer has its pill. It's called Paxlovid, and they say, I mean, the data hasn't been fully released, but they claim that it reduces the risk of hospitalization and death by almost 90%. And that was in a
wow.
clinical trial of people who are at risk from COVID of hospitalization and death. And the way that it
Okay.
works is it blocks the virus. Once you are infected, it blocks it from making more copies of itself. So
Oh,
that's
Oh,
huge.
okay.
And it's
Okay.
also given in combination with another older drug called ritonavir, which is used to treat HIV. And so you would take
Mm-hmm.
3 pills twice a day, and it's important. It would be important to take it sort of at the first signs of infection, so within 48 hours to get the best effect. Now, Merck's pill, which is called molnupiravir, was only 50% effective, which is still important in
Yeah.
reducing hospitalization and death. It's already been approved in the UK for high risk populations. They've already put their information into the FDA to get approved here. Pfizer still has to put their information in. They think it's going to be later this month. And so, probably as early as the beginning of the year, if these things are approved for emergency use authorization, we might have these medications available, which hopefully will, along with vaccination, continue to cut the rate of hospitalization and death.
Great. That's
wow.
good news.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
keep fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Um, all right, let's get into these vaccination mandates and the federal court and whatnot, Dr. Mel.
What not?
It
Let's
wa-
get to the federal
right.
courts.
Right. So this was a court in Louisiana that knocked down the Biden administration mandate that large companies, so ones over 100 employees, had until January 4th to ensure that their workforces were vaccinated, or the people who weren't vaccinated would have had to submit to weekly COVID tests.
Okay.
Mhm.
And it has some reasonable provisions in there, which was you got paid time off to go get vaccinated, you got sick leave to
Sick
recover
time.
from any reaction that you had to it, such as a reaction I had.
Hmm.
Um, you could, um, if you were a fully remote worker, you didn't really have to comply with the mandate. You could do what you want to do because you're at home, not around people.
Right.
And the companies had to provide medical and religious exemptions. So, there was some reasonableness in there, and it was working. It actually pushed vaccine rates up into the 90% range for a lot of large companies like Tyson Food and United Airlines. So
Mhm.
it was working. So we're just going to have to see what, if there's appeal to this and what happens with it.
Okay. All
All
right.
right. So
Interesting discussion.
yeah, I mean that's going to be an ongoing situation we're gonna have to watch.
Yep.
Right.
So I like to jump in, and we've had some issues here in the area which we live, the DMV area, with a lot of people just between road rage and we had a friend who had a very incredible incident with road rage, and some people, these massive shootings and stuff around, and some people are saying that long COVID is causing some psychiatric issues. Dr. Bell, can you speak to that?
Well, yeah, I can. There was a study. It was just really a case series that showed that there are three teenagers, um, all in California,
Mhm.
who, as their manifestation of their long COVID, was suicidal thoughts, paranoia
Mm.
like fears, delusions, and
Mm.
foggy brain.
Wow.
And they had only had mild COVID, right? These three teens. But when they actually, they looked at the fluid around their brain. You might have heard of a spinal tap or a lumbar puncture. That's what they had. So they examined that fluid and they found that there were antibodies to brain tissue in the fluid. And so they're putting this together that basically COVID um, caused an autoimmune response to the nervous system tissue, and that as a
Oh,
result, these are some of the symptoms that the young people were exhibiting, which is very concerning when you consider that this is a possibility to happen. So basically, we knew that long COVID was associated with mental health issues, but I don't think, you know, they this is actually the first time they've shown these autoantibodies, that are surrounding in the fluid surrounding the brain. And so, it's just really concerning when you think about how many people have had COVID, right? We
yeah.
said up at the top of the broadcast that 46.3 million people in the United States alone
Hmm.
have had COVID. What that could mean in terms of what kind of psychiatric manifestations are people having and how are they playing out in the public square and at work and at schools. We just have so much to learn about long COVID and how this is going to play out
Hmm.
over the next few weeks to months to years.
Mm.
Shit. Well, hell, I haven't. I mean, I'm sorry. I almost really cussed, but I, didn't- I haven't had COVID, but long pandemic stress. So I've been,
There's that too.
so real talk. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm not trying to really be funny, but so our stress as folks who haven't been infected and our depression and all of our mental wellness issues just living through the pandemic.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
can only imagine that actually being infected by it. Of course, that makes complete sense that it would affect the central nervous
Right.
system.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just
Exactly.
just being in a pandemic is stressful and can cause mental health issues.
Yeah,
And really depression is one of the
right.
issues that people are seeing a lot of, and we hear more and more about depression. And it seems like we might have some relief coming, Dr. Bell, with the magnets for depression.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wanted to kind of end on a positive note. The American Journal of Psychiatry reported on a clinical trial that showed an almost 80% improvement in the participants in the trials symptoms of severe depression. So these
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
did not mild depression, severe depression going into remission. And what
Wow.
did they use? They used the principle of magnetism or magnets. So there's something at Stanford, the study came out of Stanford called SAINT, which stands for Stanford Accelerated Intelligent Neuromodulation Therapy. So let's just call it SAINT.
Okay.
And it builds on existing therapies for depression that use magnets, but it's targeted and fast acting. So what they do is they send magnetic pulses through your brain, through your skull to your brain, and they use an MRI machine to actually pinpoint the exact spot in the brain that's underactive in your depression. There's a particular area of the brain, and they stimulate that with a magnetic coil.
Wow.
And the magnetic pulses sort of mimic the way that the brain communicates with itself. So repetition of those pulses essentially is teaching the brain how to maintain its own balance and sort of restore it back to a normal state. And it only takes like 1 to 3 days in order to see the
Wow.
effects. Yep.
Wow.
And so the next thing they're going to do is roll it out to hospitals to as a treatment for patients who come in suicidal to try to stabilize
Mm.
them before they leave. So it's something to watch. But the real reason that I wanted to report on it was to underscore that depression is not like a personality quirk, right?
Right.
It really has its roots in the physical manifestation within your brain. It's a disease, just like asthma is a disease of the
Mm.
lung. And so I think we're going to see many more of these kinds of treatments um, that recognize the use of magnets, the use of light to be able to help to calibrate the brain.
Mhm.
Thank you, Dr. Mill. That's a great distinction. It's a disease like these other diseases. And
Right.
Yep.
I don't think
It's
we hear that enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a character flaw, it's not a
Mhm.
weakness, it's not a moral failing. It's a disease,
It's a
Mhm.
disease.
and we need to treat it like that.
And that could
Yep.
be like I'm looking at some of the comments, like my buddy Kristen Ledford said, that could be a game changer.
Yeah.
A
Yes.
game
Yes.
changer. We're talking,
Yep.
healing the disease and treating and
Mhm.
healing the disease. That's a game
Yeah.
changer for so
Yeah.
many people who suffer from that disease. It's
Yeah.
a game changer.
Now there's maintenance required, so it's not
Sure.
they see the results in 1 to 3 days, but it also requires, ongoing therapy with this saint protocol.
I'm sorry, Dr. Bell. I could just imagine somebody walking around with like uh, a hat, a cap with some magnets on
Hey,
it.
people walk around
Man,
with glucose meters on their
right. I'm
arm,
just
you know what I
saying,
mean?
let's put some
Um,
That's funny.
magnets on our head.
you're
It's gonna
right.
be a game changer. You
You're
don't
right.
need anything else but some magnets on your head.
Yep,
Right.
I'm sorry. It's my role here. I'm not a doctor. It's my role to have
you're
fun.
right.
I'm sorry. So
So what
uh,
what time is it, Wayne? What
you
what
know
what are
what
we ready
time
for?
you know what time it is.
The Weekly Debunk. Stopping misinformation in its tracks.
Tyrone Twitter Fingers is back. He says
Mhm.
Aaron Rodgers says boosting your immunity with ivermectin and vitamins is immunizing yourself against the virus. He said this idea, it's a pandemic of the unvaccinated, is just a total lie. Aaron.
I don't know about that. Excuse me, Dr. Mill. Is this true?
No, it's not. And Aaron Rodgers used to be my favorite quarterback,
He
but
was.
I've jumped off I
He
have jumped off
was.
Aaron Rodgers' bus. Um, so this is a deal. He's a Green Bay Packers quarterback for people who don't follow football. He was recently diagnosed with COVID, and he made a series of false public statements about vaccines and COVID-19 because he had led people to believe that he was quote unquote that he was vaccinated by telling people he was immunized because he was
Immunized.
following this protocol that he got from a podcast host called Joe Rogan, who told him to take ivermectin and some vitamins and he would be fine. And he was a critical thinker, and that's why he did this. So the fact is that unvaccinated people still compose the vast majority of COVID-related hospitalizations and deaths, not vaccinated people. The CDC studied more than 600,000 cases of COVID-19 from 13 states and found that unvaccinated people were 4.5 times more likely to get infected. Okay, so that speaks to just the spread is cut down among those who are vaccinated. 10 times more likely to get hospitalized and 11 times more likely to die than people who were vaccinated. Then he also said that the only way to basically that that this protocol immunized him. But the only way to fight an infection is for your body to make antibodies. So these natural remedy protocols and things that he was doing, while they may be great or may make you feel healthier, they don't create antibodies. What creates antibodies is either getting infected or getting vaccinated. And getting vaccinated is much safer than getting infected. That's what it just boils down to. And then the last thing that I'm going to address that he said was, to my knowledge, there's been 0 long-term studies around sterility or fertility issues around the vaccine. So that was definitely something I was worried about. So he shouldn't be worried because according to the CDC, there is currently no evidence that any vaccines, including COVID-19, cause fertility problems in men or women. However, as has been reported on this show before, the University of Miami did conduct a study late last year, and it showed, voila, that people who are vaccinated, men specifically who are vaccinated, do not have a drop in their sperm counts. Actually, their sperm counts went up, but that probably true and unrelated, and found no changes in their ability to have erections or anything like that. Now, patients with COVID, though, especially long COVID, do report problems with sperm count and with the ability to have erections. So just some food for thought. And
You
yeah,
just gonna leave that there, Dr. Mel?
I got
Food for thought. You talking about?
well,
talking-
it's true.
And look,
and you
hey,
know, I
could I say
what's
this?
that?
Hey,
Uh-huh.
AA Ron, this is to you, AA Ron. Look, that was stupid what you said. That's opinion of Wayne Bruce, does not reflect the opinion of Dr. Mel and any of the rest of the producers and show hosts. Hey, Ron,
Well,
you're on your head.
Well, thank you for that, Wayne. And I'm about to find a new favorite quarterback who is currently playing. So on that note, I want to thank you guys, and we'll see you in a little bit. I want to transition to our topic for tonight, because I know a lot of you have joined in part because you have questions about this newly authorized Pfizer vaccine for COVID for children ages 5 to 11. But even parents who might have taken the vaccine for themselves are concerned about making that decision for their young ones. So what's the deal? To vaccinate or not? Children's edition. And with me is the wonderful Dr. Yolandra Hancock, community pediatrician extraordinaire, TEDx speaker, public health shiro who teaches public health students. She's an entrepreneur and a mommy herself to a beautiful 9-year-old. So we are just delighted that she is joining us tonight. Hi, Yolandra, Dr. Yolo.
Hi, thank you so much for having me in this space. It's such an honor to be here with you, Dr. Mel.
Well, thank you. Well, I am so happy you're here because I got some questions, and I know our audience is going to have some questions. So let's jump right into it. So children have a very low risk of severe or fatal COVID-19. And some studies say they're less likely to transmit COVID-19. So why do they need to be vaccinated?
I think it's important for us to recognize that although children haven't been as disproportionately impacted by COVID as compared to adults, when you look at COVID-19 versus something like the flu, you see that COVID-19 is more impactful than influenza. Within a 12-month period of time, we usually would see no more than around 189 children losing their lives to influenza. At a 12-month mark within the pandemic, we had lost over 300 children. So It's important for us to compare children to children, not children to adults, because children are not little adults. That's the first thing that we have to recognize just as a country. The second thing that we have to recognize is specifically within this age group, between 5 to 11-year-olds, close to 2 million children in this age group experienced COVID-19. 8,300 children were hospitalized in this age group due to COVID-19, and 94 children 5 to 11 lost their lives to COVID-19.
Wow.
So it isn't that children aren't dying, that they aren't hospitalized. Certainly in comparison to grown-ups, they aren't, but in comparison to themselves, COVID-19 has also impacted them. And when we think about the numbers in terms of children not being able to go to school, how many children were impacted socially, educationally, and eventually economically, there are a variety of reasons why children have to be strongly considered in terms of having the same level of protection that we as adults do.
Yeah. Thank you for that excellent summary. And let's go back to those children who've been affected negatively by COVID, those who've been hospitalized and die. Is that evenly distributed throughout all ethnic groups in the population?
Absolutely not. In the same way that we observed health disparities related to COVID-19 among adults, we've seen it and even greater among children. When you think about the number of children who have acquired COVID-19, 75% of them have been Black or brown. Of the children who have acquired the multi-system inflammatory syndrome that affects you, as my grandmother would say, from your rooter to your tutor, 80% of those children have been Black or brown. And of the children, over 500 children now that we have lost to COVID-19, over 75% of them are African American, Latinx, or Native American. So our children are not experiencing this the same. And when you think about the psychosocial impact, 140,000 children have now been orphaned because of COVID-19. The majority of those children being from communities of color. And so on a variety of levels, our children have experienced this pandemic in a much different way, in a more impactful way, which is yet another reason why we as parents of color and a community of color have to strongly consider this vaccine for our children.
I think that's a very compelling statement and summary of how it is affecting Black and brown communities and children of color. So in this study, how many children were studied, and did the studies include children of color?
Excellent question. There were initially around 2,200 children. That's what the data is being reported on that was presented to the FDA and the CDC. It wasn't until later in the summer when adolescents received the vaccine and there were real concerns about the risk of myocarditis, the FDA actually compelled Pfizer and Moderna to add an additional 2,200 children to the study population. In terms of racial demographics, there were struggles. I serve on the board for Children's National Medical System, which served as one of the sites for the additional 2,200 children to participate in the study. And there has been a struggle for communities of color to have representation. There was a small percentage of children of color in this study, but there certainly is room for more. And, certainly we understand why there are some concerns around our children participating in the study, but it also becomes a catch-22. If we don't trust the system to create a vaccine, then how do we trust the vaccine once it is created? So I really want to commend every single parent, every single guardian who allowed their children to participate, because it allows parents like myself to be able to feel more comfortable in making a decision for our children to get vaccinated.
And I'm sorry, I just have to say this. I noticed that you said that Children's National Medical Center was in the second group of 2,200. I always feel frustrated when I hear things like that. Like, why weren't they in the first group? Because we know that historically you have to include institutions that serve people of color in these clinical trials if you want people of color to participate in the clinical trials. It's the same story every time. I'm sorry. Footnote.
No, you're absolutely right. Certainly the priority should have been partnering with organizations like Howard Medical Center, Meharry Medical Center,
Exactly.
centers that are providing services, trusted services to communities of color. I can't really speak to the recruitment strategies that they utilize, especially for these big pharma companies. I know that for them it has been a struggle. I know physicians like myself, I don't engage in big pharma activities just because I don't want there to be any tainted fruit. But certainly there are ways in which you can create these partnerships so that the study population is more representative of this country's population.
Yes, exactly. So you brought up myocarditis. Explain to us what myocarditis is, and did it emerge as an issue in this population of young ones 5 to 11?
Excellent question. So myocarditis is a fancy medical term for inflammation of the muscles of your heart. You can have myocarditis or something called pericarditis, which is an inflammation of the area surrounding the heart. This isn't specific to the COVID-19 vaccine. Myocarditis is actually something that you can get even with a common cold. Viral infections are usually linked to myocarditis. Vaccines for the protection of viral infections are also associated with a risk of myocarditis. We also see some risk groups, particularly male patients, are at a higher risk, and specifically male adolescent patients as a standard, not specifically to this vaccine. What we did recognize once the vaccine for the adolescent population was rolled out, the 12 to 17-year-old population, we did recognize that there was a slightly elevated risk of myocarditis in the vaccinated population compared to the general population. Mind you, I said general population. When you compare the risk of myocarditis in the vaccinated population to the risk of myocarditis with the actual COVID-19 infection, there truly is no comparison. What we know based on the data is that for every 1,100 people who get the COVID-19 infection, one person will get myocarditis and a pretty significant case of myocarditis, inflammation of the muscles of the heart. For the COVID-19 vaccine, based on the most current and well-vetted data, and I'll tell you why I said that in a second, is 1 in 9,000. So for every 9,000 people who get the COVID-19 vaccine, one person will get a mild case of myocarditis. And so every time you have to think about whether or not you're going to get the vaccine versus playing Russian roulette and deciding whether or not you're going to get COVID-19 infection, you have to compare the risk of whatever the side effect or adverse outcome is with COVID-19 infection versus what it will be with the COVID-19 vaccination. And I will tell you, hands down, for every single side effect or adverse outcome that people are concerned about with COVID-19's vaccine, to the point that you made about erectile dysfunction and those other concerns, you'll see a significantly higher risk of those same issues with the actual infection and a much stronger response. And I think that's what's most important. Specifically for this population, we did not see any cases of myocarditis in the 5 to 11-year-old population, but we also have to be transparent about the numbers. There weren't enough participants for us to be able to observe myocarditis in this study population. We would have to have around 13,000 children receive the vaccine to observe at least one case of mild myocarditis.
Right. And I think, and underscore mild, which means that you don't necessarily even have to be hospitalized for it. A lot of the young men, those adolescents who got it, were never even hospitalized for it in the majority of cases. Yeah.
Absolutely. And of the cases where I believe there were 9 myocarditis related deaths, 3 of them were specifically linked to the viral infection. The other 6 were not linked to either the virus or to the vaccine. So there have not yet been to date any deaths associated with myocarditis in this country.
And that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to parents who are concerned about the normal growth and development of their children? Is there any concern about getting vaccinated for COVID in terms of their growth and development?
That's an excellent question. One certainly I have heard often as a pediatrician. What I would say is, one, just in terms of vaccines in general, there have been no studies that have demonstrated any impact on development, any impact on cognitive development, physical development, any of those things, despite what we hear about concerns around autism and all those things. Over 1 million children have now been studied in randomized control trials and in observational studies to show that there is no link between vaccines in general and issues like autism. Specifically for this vaccine, the trial started back in March.
I want to put a pin in that. There have been 1 million children studied with vaccines, and no link has been shown between vaccines and autism.
No link.
Let's take a breath and just absorb that. Okay, cool. Thank you. Please continue.
No problem.
This vaccine.
No problem. Because I get this question a lot, right? And half my practice are of families who have not chosen to get their children vaccinated. And although I refuse to boot people out of my practice, we always have these conversations. Particularly for this vaccine, we know the trial started in March. We've had children in trials, especially for the adolescent population, well before then. We have been following our children very, very closely to make sure that there have been no concerns related to development in any way, shape, or form. But what we do know, again, it goes back to what we know for sure. What we know for sure is what COVID-19 does for our children, particularly for our younger children. What we've seen, especially when it comes to long COVID, is that in our children and in women, we see more of the depression, anxiety, neurocognitive impact related to long COVID, as opposed to our male population, where we're seeing more systematic issues like lung function, cardiac function, and renal function. What we do not yet know, but can anticipate, is that with long COVID, because of some of the initial findings that we have now been able to observe, now that we're paying more attention to how children are experiencing long COVID, is that there will be longitudinal impact from COVID-19 infection. To date, we have not seen any long-term side effects or adverse outcomes from any vaccine since we stopped using oral polio back like 15, 20 years ago when I first started practicing pediatrics. I think was the last time I observed outside of this country when I was doing rotations out in Africa. That was the last time oral polio actually was administered. We haven't seen any long-term impacts from vaccines since then, and we're not seeing any of those issues with the COVID-19 vaccine.
Yeah, so if you're going to get a reaction to a vaccine, it typically happens within the first 6 weeks of getting the vaccine or less. And no long-term side effects of vaccines, but definitely long-term side effects of COVID, as we've already discussed in this broadcast. Well, I want to leave time for some audience questions. So we're going to call back in to the studio, Mr. Bruce and Miss Mays, so that they can curate some of the audience questions for us.
So many questions.
All right, let's bring them on. Bring them on.
First, we thank you, Dr. Yolo, for coming in this and telling the truth and speaking truth to not only power, just to the masses. So we thank you for that. So you go ahead, kick it off, Lila.
Well, okay. I was gonna jump on that too. Thank you, Dr. Yo. I mean, you're just the way you speak about it is so passionate and just and so knowledgeable. It's really, really appreciated. This question is from Valerie Spalding Parker. What were the general criteria for children participating in the vaccine trials? And she's wondering if they used mainly healthy children or did they include children with chronic illnesses?
Great question.
That's an excellent question. The only exclusionary criteria, meaning what were the things that you had to have that said, no, you could not participate, clearly were things like having an allergic reaction to previous vaccines. You didn't want to include little ones in that case. Any little ones who had some significant health issues. So those who had asthma were not excluded. Those dealing with obesity were not excluded. The chronic diseases that we need to know about, especially those that serve as heightened risk factors for COVID-19 severity and death, those were all included in this vaccination population. Children who were immunocompromised were not included in this study population, only because they wanted to be able to see truly what the immune response was going to be based on the differences in the dosing, as you guys are you likely have made your audience aware of. The initial part of the study, the phase 1, was just to determine how much of the vaccine do children need, 10, 20, or 30 micrograms, which is the full dose for adults. What they were able to decide was, even based on 10 micrograms, children were able to mount as strong an immune response as those with the full dose in the age group 16 to 25.
Wow. Which
for me as a mother was very reassuring. It was one of the first questions that I asked was, well, how much of this vaccine are you going to give to my child? If I got the Moderna one, so that's still the question for them. But that certainly that was one of my main questions was, are you adjusting the dose? A common question that comes up that I'll add on to this is, why isn't it adjusted based on weight? Vaccines, drugs are based on weight in the pediatric population. Vaccines are not. It's really based on the immune response that is triggered by the vaccine, which is why a 2-month-old will get the same amount of vaccine as a 6-month-old, although clearly the weight is different.
Okay.
Yeah. So this vaccine is the 10 micrograms, so a third of the dose of what an adult would get.
Right.
Okay. So we have a question from Tracy Clarke. Tracy Clarke says, my son is 7 and has Down syndrome and would like some advice on whether or not he should receive the vaccine.
That's an excellent question. A couple of my babies have Down syndrome. One of them is 6. And his mom, if she's watching, you know who you are, love you guys to pieces. She has the same question, and we have not yet had a chance to talk about it because we've missed each other. So I'm glad that question came up. The answer is absolutely yes. There has not been enough attention paid, particularly for children with Down syndrome, as it relates to the COVID-19 vaccine. What we do know based on data from adults with Down syndrome is that adults with Down syndrome experience COVID-19 as severely as those with other chronic health conditions, for a variety of reasons. One of them, because of the immune impact that Down syndrome has on the body. It affects the lymphocytes, which are the cells that help to fight off viral infections. 2, a lot of little ones and adults with Down syndrome also deal with obesity, which also serves as a risk factor. One of these studies coming out of the UK showed that adults with Down syndrome had a 50% higher chance of being hospitalized due to COVID-19. So for all of those reasons, I would highly recommend that children and adults with Down syndrome get vaccinated. To me, they sit in that same space as others who are dealing with immunocompromise.
Yeah, excellent summary. And also to a risk factor that a lot of people don't realize. We talked about depression. Mental health issues like severe depression have been added as one of those issues that that raise your risk for severe outcomes from COVID. So those 2 are on the list along with Down syndrome.
Interesting. Wayne, I see a question from Yvonne Smith. How is a 3-year-old with COVID treated?
Okay.
That's an excellent question. You know, certainly we've come a long way in our COVID-19 management. One of the great things is the implementation of dexamethasone, also known as Decadron. It's a drug that we've used in pediatrics and in adult medicine, as Dr. Clarke can attest to, for a long time. We usually use it in the case of asthma. And so it depends on whether or not the child is outpatient or inpatient. If a child is sick enough to require hospitalization, they get the same little package of treatment that grown-ups do, but at a different dose. A lot of the medications like dexamethasone, remdesivir, et cetera, are dosed based on a child's weight. When a little one is outpatient, we have not yet seen significant information about children receiving things like monoclonal antibodies, but certainly being able to stay hydrated, a lot more symptomatic treatment as it relates to fever control, making sure they maintain hydration. All of those things are going to be important. We have not yet heard from either Merck or Pfizer with this new game-changing drug, how that's going to be approached for the pediatric population. We do know that little ones have access to something called Tamiflu, which is the drug that we use when little ones have influenza. And the drug that Merck is producing is very similar. It's like the cousin of Tamiflu. So I would imagine, if not now, at some point soon, that's going to be something available to our little ones as well.
Okay. So I'm often, Dr. Mill and Lila often get on me for not including some questions and some comments that are not so friendly to us. But I want to say
we want them all.
Let's educate the people.
I want to educate some people. So I got some people that need education in our comments. Okay. This one comes from Carmel Zeno. Hopefully that's your real name, Carmel. Here we go. This is a pretty name. Yes, and COVID-19 vaccines do not prevent COVID. So why are we still standing behind medicine that does not preventing getting COVID? Doctors are basically healing symptoms. See?
I think it's an excellent question, and it helps us to clarify what the purpose of the vaccine was, right? There were hundreds of thousands of people dying in this country alone. The vaccine served 2 purposes. The questions that were asked during the study is, does this vaccine prevent you from getting severely ill to the point where you have to be hospitalized? And does it keep you from dying? Those were the two main questions. That was the urgency of getting the vaccine pushed out so that we would reduce the number of people who got so severely ill that we were overwhelming the healthcare system, right? We were impacting healthcare heroes like Dr. Clarke working in the emergency department hours upon hours. Then once we saw that, okay, we're talking 94 to 97% effective against severe infection and death, now let's see how well it works in terms of preventing infection once exposed. What lets us know the vaccine is working is that when you look across the country, between 88 to 98% of those who are hospitalized are people who are not vaccinated. Over 95% of those who are dying from COVID are not vaccinated. I'll take those odds and push this shot any day when I know that only between 4 to 12% of those hospitalized are those who got the vaccine that ended up getting sick. And the majority, back to the person's question, the majority of that 4 to 12% who are ending up sick enough to be hospitalized or dying from COVID are usually our seniors or are immunocompromised or have significant health issues like diabetes, obesity, high blood pressure, etc. So it's that double whammy that facilitates the decreased protection. And when you think about it, our seniors were the first to get the vaccine. Just your age alone facilitates your immune system waning over time. Your immune response just goes down simply based on the beauty of aging. And so the majority of those who originally got the shot back in December, January, their immune response started to come down after around 6 months. They also happen to be our seniors. Again, another double whammy that facilitated what we're classifying as breakthrough infections, right? And when you think about effectiveness, if it's a 93% effective shot, that means for 100 people, 93 people are going to be real good. 7 people are still going to be over there needing some admission, needing some additional care. This vaccine was never designed to be 100% effective. Very rarely do we see vaccines that are 100% effective. It's the reason why we have to get a flu shot every single year. The reason why we have to still get tetanus boosters every 5 to 10 years. It's just the way that the system works. But to show that it works, just look at who's in the hospital and who's dying.
Okay.
So it's so nice just to sit back and
unless somebody say
thank
what
you,
you just said.
Thank you, Dr. Yolandra. I love my analogy, so I'm just going to talk about my coat analogy. So when you go out into a snowstorm, right, you want to layer up. You want to have your long johns, you want to have your shirt on, your flannel shirt, and you want to have your parka, okay? So it doesn't mean you're not going to feel cold in the snowstorm, but it's much better than if you go out there naked, because you will die of frostbite, okay? So having your mask, using your social distancing as your underlying layers of clothing, and then having that down jacket on in the outside, which is the vaccine, again, doesn't keep you from getting cold. So it might not keep you from getting COVID, but it will keep you from dying in the snowstorm of frostbite and death. So, and hypothermia. So that's my addition to all the wonderful facts and figures that Dr. Yolandra gave.
Okay. We're in the lightning rounds here. We have to educate more people.
Okay.
And this goes back to Joseph McGee. If the pandemic is a result of the unvaccinated, then can you explain all those cases in Israel?
That's an excellent question as well. Again, we have to really pay attention to, one, what are we doing, as Dr. Clarke mentioned, what are those layers, right? So if everyone's getting vaccinated and you completely remove all the other layers of protection, which is what Israel did, and we're seeing the same thing happening in Europe now. We're seeing what now folks are classifying as potentially a 5th wave of the pandemic. If we throw the baby out with the bathwater because we assume everyone is to be protected simply because we've reached a certain threshold of those who have been vaccinated, and make the assumption to the other person's question that no one can transmit COVID simply because we've been vaccinated, that's where we make our mistake. We still have to take measures. Like where I live in Prince George's County, they're contemplating, as we're entering into the winter months, removing the mask mandate. I think it's completely asinine. We know that there is what we call seasonality to coronaviruses, just in the same way that there's seasonality to the flu. Flu season starts around September, ends around March. There's a reason why we call it flu season. It's because viruses like certain temperatures. They like certain climates. They just flourish in these times, in winter time, right? And so if that's the case, as we're going up into the winter, like, you know, in one of these favorite shows that I like to watch, Winter is Coming, if that's happening, and then, oh, guess what, we're going to take the mask away, where we already know COVID is going to show up bigger and badder, especially with the Delta variant. It's a setup for us to do exactly what happened in Israel and what's happening in Europe now. Success and failure leave clues. Success and failure leave clues. And so we have to pay attention to what happened in Israel. We have to pay attention now to what's happening in the UK and in Europe, so that we don't make those same mistakes. We still need to mask up. You still need to make sure you're testing so you know what your status is, and you still need to consider strongly getting vaccinated.
Right. Exactly.
Come on, Dr. Yo.
I have to say,
She's talking good.
yo, Dr. Yo. So one from this one comes from Max Gregory Anderson.
Okay, I was gonna call that one out.
You gonna call? You go ahead and read it. Go ahead.
No, you got it. I just want. No, you got.
I got it.
You got it. I just didn't want us to miss it. That's all.
Right. Could you speak to the fact that America is behind other countries in vaccinating our young? Some are vaccinated as young as 2 years old. Why do you think that is?
That's another excellent question. You know, when you look at countries like Cuba, they did not go through the same process that we did in terms of having a phase 1 through 3 trial. They said if this vaccine was good enough for grown-ups, it's good enough for the kids, push it out, roll it out, everybody gets the shot. We have done this in a much more responsible way. One, that's just the way that this country works. It's the reason why you can't just go to a pharmacy and get whatever medication you like, as opposed to going like to the farmacia in Mexico, where you can get your little amoxicillin, amlodipine, and some triamcinolone all in the same shopping trip. There are regulatory steps that we have to take in this country in order for us to know, and for the government to know, that they're doing what they're supposed to do to protect us, right? As a mother, if I lived in Cuba and there were no clinical trials and they just told me, well, it worked for the adults, give it to your child, we'd just be in the house all year, and it would be mommy school until we could either get to the States and swim over, or they get some act right and actually do clinical trials to show whether or not it is different. You know, a case that I always make, especially with the adolescent population, is should the adolescent population have received the same dose that grownups did, especially given the fact that we only have to give our children 10 micrograms. The fact that they gave adolescents the grown-up dose, they had an excellent response. We left it at that. What if we had only given them 10 or 20 micrograms as opposed to the 30? Those are the kinds of questions that we still can answer, because there are regulatory steps in place here in this country that we did not see in other places.
And there you have it.
And now we can vaccinate 5 to 11-year-olds. So I would encourage everybody to go out and, you know, start getting your children vaccinated. I saw on the news, you know, it could just been where the news cameras were, but the news cameras were at a vaccination event in a very well-resourced part of the DMV. And of course, it was just our lighter complected brothers and sisters that were there. So I would encourage everybody, no matter who you are, if you have a little one between age 5 and 11, talk to your pediatrician if you have questions. But we have the wonderful Dr. Yolandra Hancock here tonight, who's answering your questions.
And Dr. Mel, that's our show.
Yeah, that's
wow. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hancock, for joining us tonight. This has been too short, but I think we covered a lot of ground. I think hopefully the audience, which you guys always have great questions. Thank you so much for your questions. Hit upon a lot of things that are top of mind for a lot of parents. And so we're very grateful that you gave such wonderful responses, Dr. Hancock. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to my wonderful co-producers, as always. Y'all help make the show. I am going to be right back here next Monday. I'm looking forward to seeing you. I'll also be on the Russ Parr Morning Show tomorrow morning at 7:45 Eastern Time. So if you're up that early, please tune in. And if I don't see you either tomorrow or next week, please remember to be safe out there and to be wise, to be well, and to be health empowered. Thanks so much for joining us.